You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Feel like who art ed?
We'll try to slice it.
Who art is Mr. Wood art ed me?
Good. Either way, it's ambiguous. It works on so many levels.
I know.
That's off to a great start.
Welcome to Who Arted Weekly Art History for All Ages. I'm your host, Kyle Wood, and today we're looking at Lena Krassner. While her legacy has often been viewed through the lens of her marriage to Jackson Pollock, Lena Krassner was a formidable artist who forged her own distinct path, leaving an indelible mark on the art world. Born Lena Krassner, Krassner, on October 27, 1908, in Brooklyn, New York, she was the youngest of 6 children born to Russian Jewish immigrants, Chain, later Anna, and Joseph Krasner, who had fled from anti-Semitic pogroms. Lena was the only one of her siblings born in the United States. She grew up in the immigrant enclave of Brownsville, Brooklyn. Her parents owned a grocery and fish store in East New York. From an early age, she showed a passion for art. As she matured, Lena preferred to be called Lenore, a name inspired by Edgar Allan Poe, and she eventually shortened it to the more androgynous Lee, while also simplifying her surname and removing the second S. This choice of name may have reflected a desire to be seen as an artist first, unburdened by the gendered expectations in a field where male artists held considerable sway. Although she was initially rejected because she lived in Brooklyn, Krasner set her sights on Washington Irving High School in Manhattan, the only public high school in New York City at the time that offered an arts major for girls. She persisted, and she succeeded. After graduating high school in 1925, she received a scholarship to the Women's Art School of Cooper Union, where she studied from 1926 to 1929. Here, she honed her skills in portraying the human figure in still lives. One of her teachers at Cooper Union, Victor Perard, recognized her talent in life drawing and even used some of her work in his textbook. She went on to the National Academy of Design from 1928 to 1932. The curriculum at the National Academy was traditional, emphasizing life drawing, painting, and the techniques of the old masters. She became proficient in painting the human figure and natural scenes in a representational style. The thing is, Krasner was a modernist at heart and found many of the traditional schools to be too rigid. When the Museum of Modern Art, MoMA, opened in 1929, it exposed her to post-impressionism and other modern European movements, sparking a sustained interest in modern art and leading her to become critical of the academic styles she was learning in the National Academy. She described the opening of MoMA as being like a bomb that exploded. In 1937, Krasner began studying under Hans Hofmann, the influential German artist and teacher. Hofmann's modernist theories, particularly his emphasis on cubism and the two-dimensional nature of the picture plane, profoundly impacted her work. Hofmann's best known for his ideas of colors pushing forward and receding within an abstracted space. He also famously told Krasner her work was, quote, so good you would not know it was painted by a woman, end quote. He meant it as a compliment, but I think that shows just how deeply entrenched sexism was in those artistic circles that even a mentor would say something so awful. While studying under Hofmann, Krasner adopted a Cubist approach. She experimented with fragmentation of forms and the use of color to create spatial illusions that were not tied to realistic representation. During the Great Depression, Krasner, like a lot of artists, found support through the Workers' Progress Administration's Federal Art Project, which she joined in 1935. While this work, primarily assisting in the creation of murals, provided a valuable experience working on a larger scale and connected her with the broader art scene, its figurative nature was often unsatisfying to Krasner. She was increasingly drawn to abstraction. Throughout the late 1930s and early 40s, she continued to explore abstract ideas in gouache sketches, hoping to one day create an abstract mural. In 1940, Krasner joined the American Abstract Artists Group, further immersing herself in the burgeoning world of abstract art. During her time in this group, she typically exhibited Cubist-style still lifes, characterized by black grid outlines, impastoed surfaces, and gestural brushstrokes. In 1942, she meets Jackson Pollock. Well, technically, they bumped into each other previously at an artist's dance in 1936, but nothing really memorable there. In 1942, both Krasner and Pollock were part of the French and American painting show at the Macmillan Gallery. Now, Krasner looks around, and she knew everyone's work except Pollock's. She was intrigued by what she saw and decided to check him out. So she just popped over into his studio to get to know him. Fast forward to 1945, they get married and move out to a farmhouse in the Springs on Long Island. Life there was pretty much all about art. They even had separate studios. She took an upstairs bedroom, and he worked out in the barn nearby. Even though they worked apart, they definitely influenced each other. Krasner knew a lot about modern art and the New York art scene, and she introduced Pollock to important people like Willem de Kooning, the critic Clement Greenberg, and Peggy Guggenheim, the gallery owner. All of this really helped his career take off. On the other hand, Pollock pushed Krasner to loosen up, to be more spontaneous, and not stick so rigidly to what teachers had shown her. It was an intense and often difficult relationship. Pollock's alcoholism and affairs have been well documented. Despite all that, Krasner was fiercely loyal and always championed his talent, sometimes even putting his career before her own. There's no denying they had a powerful artistic bond and pushed each other creatively, which really helped to build the abstract expressionist movement. The tough part, though, was that while Pollock was alive, Krasner's own significant contributions were often overlooked. I don't want to minimize the work she was doing while they were together, though. A major breakthrough in Krasner's artistic development occurred in her Little Images series, which began in 1946. The cover art for this episode is actually one of the pieces from the Little Images series. We see this exploration of rhythm in these vibrant colors that pulsate around the canvas. There is no clear focal point. It's an example of all-over painting. Created in the upstairs bedroom studio of her and Pollock's home in Springs, Long Island, these small-scale paintings featured dense compositions of abstract symbols, often described as hieroglyphics. The canvases were sometimes small enough to fit on a bedside table, and the paint was often applied thickly, sometimes directly from the tube. Now, in the 1950s, Krasner began exploring collage in innovative ways. She incorporated paper, and she cut up some of her own and some of her husband Jackson Pollock's discarded drawings and scraps of canvas. She was a perfectionist, known to cast aside many of her works, but rather than simply dispose of them, she created new compositions. It could be a bit of the influence of Henri Matisse, who famously worked with cut paper in his later years, as his sight was failing him, but he still felt that drive to create. This act of repurposing and reinventing materials became a recurring theme in Lee Krasner's work. Following the death of Jackson Pollock in 1956, Krasner's work underwent further significant shifts. Moving her studio into the barn previously occupied by Pollock, she began to work on a much larger scale and with more saturated colors. Her powerful Earth Green series had sweeping brushstrokes and organic forms, reflecting her grief, but also her connection to nature. Later in the 1960s, she created the Umber series, a group of paintings with a restricted palette of umber and white, conveying a sense of rawness and intensity. Throughout her long career, Krasner consistently reinvented her style, moving through phases of bold color, hard edges, nature-inspired forms. She was an incredibly versatile artist. The critical reception of Lee Krasner's work evolved significantly throughout her career and after her death. While she was an active and respected member of the New York art scene from the 1940s onward, her work often remained in the shadow of Jackson Pollock's fame during his lifetime. However, there were champions of her work, like Clement Greenberg, who recognized the importance of her collage paintings in the 1950s. It was in her later years that Krasner began to receive broader artistic and commercial recognition, culminating in a retrospective solo exhibition at the Whitechapel Gallery in London in 1965, and a solo show at the Whitney Museum of American Art in 1975. The rise of feminist art history in the 1970s played a crucial role in reevaluating the contributions of overlooked female artists, leading to a renewed interest in Krasner's work. A major retrospective of her work debuted at the Houston Museum of Fine Arts in 1983 before traveling on to other venues. But following her death in 1984, the critic Robert Hughes described her as, quote, the mother courage of abstract expressionism, end quote. It was a testament to her resilience and enduring commitment to her art. But I think the best testament to her legacy was a posthumous retrospective exhibition held at MoMA in 1984 and 85. It seems like a beautiful sort of full circle moment, as MoMA's opening had ignited her passion for modernism and abstraction. That exhibition honored her complete artistic journey within the very walls of the institution that had been so crucial to its beginning.
This concludes this week's episode of Who Arted, part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. If you found this tolerable, please leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. You can find images of the work being discussed this week and every week on social media at Who Arted Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and of course on the website whoartedpodcast.com. Podcast done.